That was Muhammad Yunus in his Nobel Prize address in 2006, talking about guns versus aid. Joining us again, journalist Musharraf Zaidi, the Acumen founder, Jacqueline Novogratz, and Kashf Foundation president, Roshana Zafar. Musharraf, let me just ask you directly to play off what Muhammad Yunus said. Is it correct to assume that putting in resources, improving lives, will have a direct impact on extremism?
No, not necessarily, because I mean the evidence from a substantial body of work exists, both that's pre 9/11 as well as post 9/11, and that looks specifically not only at other instances like Latin America, but also in the instance of South Asia and specifically Pakistan, where the link between terrorism and poverty or terrorism and literacy is tenuous at best. Now, that's not to say that poverty shouldn't be solved, but poverty should be solved because it should be unacceptable to us as human beings. The problem of extremism, I mean, if we take the example of the 9/11 hijackers and terrorists, almost all of them were from wealthy families, and if not wealthy families, middle-class families. They were educated young men. They weren't illiterate, sort of, you know, starving children off the streets of Karachi or Waziristan.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, but let me just go to Roshani, because you disagree.
I absolutely disagree with that. I think we have evidence to the contrary. We've worked with 1 million poor families across Pakistan, and we've seen what happens, the change that happens. The household, if they're earning, let's say, $45 more a month, they are able to immediately put their children into school. So we're beginning to see a transformation. What that extra marginal value brings to the family is a better life. It transforms the future generation. And I don't agree that is not happening. In fact, putting in microfinance, which is a more sustainable way of providing aid to low-income households, we are beginning to see a silent revolution taking place, both in terms of children going to school, their ability to actually transcend their social backgrounds and become professionals. So I personally think that addressing poverty, which is Pakistan's biggest problem today, is going to combat in some ways the issue of security that we face.
And if I can just add, I think it links both what Musharraf and Roshani were saying, because I travel all over Pakistan, meeting with low-income people, looking at where we invest. And I was recently in Bawapur, which is really known as one of the centers for extremist madrasas. And most farming families have one child in a madrasa. NRSP, which is another incredible microfinance institution, has set up a program to provide low-cost loans to the poorest farmers. And it was a day, 120 degrees. I was out there with all of these farmers, and one stood up named Muhammad, who had 1 acre on which he was trying to support his entire family. And he not only could explain all of the economics of what it would take to double his yields, but he said, I finally have disposable income for the first time in my life. And I said, what will you use it for? And he said, well, of course, madam, to educate my children. I want to send them to private schools. The first thing he does is move from the madrasa to a private school. That's where you start to see the link.
So let me get back to you on that. Hold on a second, Roshana, I'll come to you. But let me get back to Musharraf on that, because I know what you're saying, and everybody uses the 9/11 group as an example of how it was educated people who did that. On the other hand, people say that, you know, they were the committed extremists and terrorists. The real target of all of this aid and the eradication of poverty are those who are on the brink, those who still can be swayed. So given that, when you talk about development, do you think that it's the role of the host government or NGOs like Roshana's or Acumen to do this job?
Well, let me sort of just to clarify. I've known Roshana's work and Roshana for several years, and I mean, it's a real privilege and an honor not just to share this program with Roshana, but also with Jacqueline, whose work I'm also aware of and whose work is excellent. I mean, Roshana in particular is actually a role model for young Pakistanis and is someone to emulate. But I think that keeping things in perspective is really important. So whereas the impact of Kashf is unquestionable on the 300,000 women that it has reached and the 1 million women that it wants to reach over the next few years as they transition from being a non-profit to being a for-profit bank, I think it's important to remember what the scale of the challenge is. And one of the arguments for leveraging these kinds of organizations, and there are very few of them, I have to say, an organization like Kashf or the kind of work that Acumen does, the argument for leveraging this is that, well, they do such a great job right now with the limited amount of funds, and if we were to begin to tap large amounts of money like the Kerry Lugar bill money, then that would automatically have a much greater impact.
Okay.
Actually, that's fundamentally problematic because scalability doesn't really work in aid. One of the reasons why Kashf is so successful, and one of the reasons why Jacqueline's work is acknowledged the world over over the last 10 years, is because small is beautiful, because small allows them to take risks, to be creative, to use the word Roshani used, to be innovative.
All right.
Those kinds of innovations, the innovations that make them successful, aren't possible when you scale these things up into the kind of size
what I want to, that's what I want to address.
With the Kerry Lugar money.
Because precisely what you're saying has always been the criticism and the skepticism about about microfinance. So Roshani, how do you scale up to make a real difference?
I think I'd like to argue the other way. If you look at Bangladesh, which is the mecca of microfinance, scale has happened. And scale happened not just in one case, it was replicated across 5 institutions. Today, 86% of the people who need financial services in Bangladesh are actually serviced. And the Bangladeshi economy today is doing better than Pakistan's. So, I mean, maybe it's a normative argument in some ways, but it does verify when we look at the bottom line in the case of Bangladesh.
Now, go ahead. If I could just add to what Roshani is saying, because I see you shaking your head. And when I started Acumen Fund, I wondered as well, what kind of scale would we see? What I'm seeing is scale on 2 levels, actually. One is, and we're seeing this particularly in India, and I think that it's beginning to happen in Pakistan as well, where there was no water industry at all. And we found one company willing to take the kind of risk that Musharraf is talking about. Now that it has 400,000 people giving access to 1 million to safe water for the first time, the government of Andhra Pradesh has come to partner and take it to scale with it. So I really believe that increasingly private innovation can lead to public change. But the innovation will come from those private innovators themselves. And in Pakistan, we're seeing a similar trajectory in housing. Really easy for politicians to say we're going to build 1 million houses. When I first went in 2002, I heard that a lot. Haven't seen very many of those built through government, yet now that we're seeing Saiban and AMC build houses, we're in conversation with government about potential of partnership. I think that's where we're going to start to see real scale. And then there's the scale of the human imagination. Then there's the scale of frame